Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our series of webinars around the 6 themes of the CMI Women Blueprint for Balance, which are balanced recruitment, mentoring and sponsorship, promoting leadership equality, skills and career development, flexible working and pay and rewards. The CMI Women Network was established 50 years ago, and we're actually celebrating our 50-year anniversary as part of our events this month in order to promote women in management and to put diversity and inclusion at the heart of great leadership. The Blueprint for Balance is CMI's innovative open source tool to promote diversity in the workplace and support CMI's objective of producing the world's strongest pipeline of women in management. We're always looking for new resources. If you'd like to suggest any, please do so on the Blueprint for Balance page, which will be a link shared with you later on in the webinar. This network's not exclusive just for women. We also encourage men to be agents of change and become everyday champions of women at work and to help drive organisational strategies for balance. Today, we're looking at mentoring and sponsorship. My name is Katie Kelly, and I'm a member of the CMI London board. I'm delighted to be shortly handing over to Emily West, founder of Alchemy Consulting Group, to begin today's webinar on mentoring and sponsorship. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can ask them using the live chat box, which you'll find to the right of your screen right now, and we'll answer as many of the questions as we can towards the end of the webinar. Today's session is being recorded and it's going to be shared with you later on today for those of you who've booked to attend, and it's also going to be available in Management Direct for those of you who are already members. So all I have to do now is welcome Emily and hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks so much for that lovely introduction. It is always a joy to be with the CMI and back running another session, and fantastic to be running one as part of the Blueprint for Balance, which is a really fantastic curriculum that they've got going there. So I'm delighted to be here talking to you about a topic that's very close to my heart, mentoring and sponsorship. But before I get started and introduce myself, I just want to get you all to download, go to the URL and just access the polling. So just, Ellen, if you can just move the slide on, because for some reason my clicker has failed me. Fantastic, thank you for stepping in. So please go to pollev.com/CMI events. And you can enter your name, but the poll will be anonymous. And then we're going to have some questions shortly, and I want to get to know you all. And I know that we've had, I think, 500 people sign up. So fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. So Ellen, I'm afraid you're going to have to control the slides for me today. So if we could just move on to the introduction. Thank you so much. So why am I here talking about sponsoring and mentorship? Well, in the main, it's because of my own experience. I had a 14-year career in investment banking, and 4 years ago, I left to set up my own consultancy and coaching business. And I work with companies and I work with individuals to help them develop authentic brands, connect with their customers. And in my career in investment banking, I benefited hugely from mentoring and sponsorship myself. But also, I got a lot out of being a mentor and sponsoring others. And so I was definitely someone who was pushing that culture in my organization. And in fact, when the CMI asked me if I would talk on this topic, I reflected on when I first got involved with mentoring and realized that when I was at university, that was my first experience. I started as a first year at the University of Warwick, and I was studying economics. And in that first year, I realized I didn't have any one senior guiding me. And so when I was a second year, I got together with some of my friends and we set up a mentoring program so that all first years who started in economics at that university would be given a second and third year mentor. And the idea was that mentor could just give you that really helpful guidance when you start in a new university, a new topic, answering everything from, which textbooks to buy or how to approach your assignments, to the really useful stuff like which were the best bars. And so we set that program up, and one of my colleagues managed to get some funding, I think, from JP Morgan to do it. And that was my first experience of wanting to also help other people get mentors. So it's really fantastic for me today to be here sharing with you all about sponsorship and mentoring. And we will be talking about what is it to be a sponsor? What does it mean to be a mentor? But also we're going to talk about the huge benefits, both for organizations and individuals. And then we're going to be talking about how do you set up a culture within an organization to promote this? And particularly, how do you set up a mentoring culture or a mentoring scheme? And then we're going to talk about the key skills you need to mentor and sponsor. And so this will be very, very relevant to you as an individual, but also if you want to be an agent of change in your organization. We will have time for Q&A at the end, and please do reach out to me as well, connect on LinkedIn. I'll share my email at the end. I'd love to hear from you and connect with you if you have any questions about it. I am also really glad that we're talking about this now, as we've just entered into another lockdown. So some of you may have been returning to work, and we may have thought that work life was returning a little bit to some normality that we had pre-COVID. But as it's obvious that we're going to be working remotely for a really long time, it's important that we talk about the impact that has on talent. So there's some benefits, obviously, and I'm sure some of you will have enjoyed the flexibility of working from home. Certainly, it makes it more accessible for people to, take on roles where they normally couldn't do it because of the commute, or if they wanted to work flexi hours around childcare. There's huge advantages of working from home with all of that. I'm sure there's many women on this session as well who've experienced the disadvantage of trying to work and look after your children who are meant to be in school. So I know it's been a huge challenge, but I do hope that going forward, a lot of the flexibility we've gained remains. And that really does help diversity, and it does help people who need a flexible work setup to develop and thrive. However, there is a big downside of working remotely, and that is visibility, because you're not visible in the office. You're not going to have those organic moments where you bump into a senior person or they see you around. You might not have as many natural opportunities to speak up in a meeting or present. So the danger is that with us working remotely, the people who aren't natural self-promoters, who aren't as good at advocating for themselves or putting their hand up and making sure they get speaking opportunities, could become even more invisible. Now, we're going to talk about visibility and the benefits of sponsoring and mentorship to raise someone's visibility. But anecdotally, certainly in my experience, I have seen that women specifically struggle to advocate for themselves, and they can be less confident in putting themselves forward, whether that's for a promotion or just speaking up. So the concern here is that we could lose some visibility of talent that, that otherwise might be more visible if we weren't working remotely. So this is actually why having sponsorship and mentorship within your organization is even more important. Even if it might seem a bit more challenging, actually we talk about accessibility and how doing this remotely can actually be really beneficial. So I'm really happy to be talking on this topic today. I think it's really relevant. Before we get straight and stuck into the topics, I want to get to know you. So Ellen, if we can just go forward to the questions we're going to ask you. So please do get the poll link up ready, because these are the questions I'm going to ask. And we just want to find a little bit out about our audience and who we're speaking with today. So on to the first question. We'd love to know your level of seniority. So on the polling app, you just have to give us one of your answers. Here we go. Fantastic, you've already filled it in. So mainly we have middle management with us today, some senior management, which is great, some junior, and some non-management. So we'll make sure the content is relevant to all of you, whether you're in a management position and you can actually influence the mentoring and sponsorship, or whether you're thinking more from your own perspective that you want to have a sponsor or mentor or get involved with this. So majority, as I said, middle management and quite a lot of non-management. So on to the next question, please. Are you a CMI member? So I'm a CMI fellow, and I have to say that the CMI has the most brilliant content. They've been doing the most fantastic webinars, particularly through lockdown, they really upped their game and produced loads of fantastic virtual content. So I'm delighted that most of you are CMI members. It's lovely to be with you, even virtually. And for those who aren't, we will talk about some resources at the end. And I highly recommend you sign up because you do get access to the most fantastic resources. So the next question, please. Do you have one or more sponsors yourself? So this is really important, is that we think about who our sponsors are, who advocates for us. And sometimes you might have a sponsor and you don't realise, but I'm delighted that at least 11% of you think that you do have a sponsor, but quite a few if you don't. So it is worth thinking about, and we'll talk about it at the very end, how do you get yourself a sponsor? And just thinking, okay, do I need a sponsor and how do I get one? A sponsor also isn't someone that you just go and get. It might be someone who's just seen your work and would advocate for you. So this comes back to visibility. If you make yourself more visible and show people the great things you do, then someone may sponsor you. You just might not know it. And in fact, I got sponsored into one of my most senior roles by someone, and I didn't know for a long time afterwards that that had even happened. So your sponsors may be invisible, but a bit of homework for you is maybe to identify some people and cultivate a sponsorship relationship. So the next question, please, is about, do you have a mentor for yourself? So let's see. It looks like it's going to be a lot higher in terms of the yeses versus the sponsors. Here we go. Let's give it a second to see where we're at. So it looks like most of you, at least half, have a mentor for yourself. And this is fantastic news because having a mentor is hugely beneficial in your own career. So the numbers are kind of, adjusting around 50-50, but still there are a lot of you who don't have a mentor. And again, we're going to talk about the benefits of that. So your homework might be to start identifying people who could be mentors for you. Okay, can we move on, please? So let's talk about mentors. What do mentors do? What are they? Now, obviously, we may have a kind of loose notion of them, but I want to get into the specifics so you really understand the mentor's role. The mentor is there to provide advice and guidance, and they're doing that drawing on their own career experience. So they do need relevant experience, and then they can share that with someone who's their mentee, which does mean normally the mentor's more senior and the mentee's more junior. A mentor, therefore, has a huge role in developing talent within an organisation because they're imparting their own advice and their own wisdom with their mentees. So this is fantastic because in your organisation, you might think of talent development as something learning and development do. You might think of it's their responsibility and you might send someone on a course or they might shadow somebody. But actually, you have so much in your business in terms of knowledge from senior people that can be imparted through mentorship. So it is a really incredible way of developing talent through sharing advice. It also is a safe space to get confidential advice. So a mentee can go to their mentor, and it should be a confidential relationship, and they can use them as a sounding board for key decisions. For example, they might be thinking they want to get promoted or they want to apply for a role, and their mentor may give them advice as to, is it the right fit? Should they apply? But also if you have concerns. So again, if you create a culture where you have mentors and mentees, then if someone has a problem or an issue and they don't feel that they can go to their manager with it, they have somebody they can go to and talk about it. And that is hugely valuable within an organisation in terms of resolving issues. And again, you might have an issue that you don't feel you can go to your manager about. For example, if you felt discriminated at by your manager, then you wouldn't necessarily go straight to your manager to talk about that. So again, having mentors is a really great way of getting advice and navigating these difficult situations, rather than having your people feel like they're on their own. Now, the relationship can start organically, or it can start through a mentoring scheme. Now, most of my mentoring relationships where I've been mentored have started organically. And I find that the relationships that endure, that last the longest, tend to start in this way. You maybe meet someone, you maybe ask them for some advice, or you hear them speak and they share something really useful, and you follow up and say, oh, can I have a coffee and ask you a few questions? And as that relationship evolves and they give you advice, it becomes a mentoring relationship. I do laugh when I do events and I do a lot of public speaking, when I get a LinkedIn message of someone saying, will you be my mentor? Someone I've never met before and we've not had a discussion about any of their challenges. So it does need to be much more organic than that. However, it can absolutely start with a mentoring scheme. And we will talk today about how you set up those schemes so that they're successful. But as I said, most mentoring relationships that last in the long term tend to be a little bit more organic than that. Okay, and finally, they do tend to be medium to long-term relationships. So we'll come on to sponsors, but sponsors can be very short relationships. A mentoring relationship tends to last a long time. It might change when you move role and the mentor doesn't become as relevant, or if you change industries. So certainly for me, my mentors changed when I left banking and moved into working with individuals and SMEs. I then got a fantastic mentor who's very familiar in that space. But those relationships can be very long and they can even turn into friendships. So they can be really fantastic relationships that you end up having for life. So that's mentors. Now let's talk about what defines a sponsor. Because a sponsor is very different. A sponsor isn't there to give advice. A sponsor is an advocate. So what does it mean to advocate for somebody? Well, if there's somebody in your organization and you see them as talent, or you think they have a natural ability in a field, you might advocate for them to get promoted or go into a new role. So you're speaking up on their behalf. You don't necessarily have to have given them any advice in order to do that. Sponsors are also often working in a specific situation. So for example, I might sponsor someone into a particular role, or there might be a specific project and I say, can we get this person on that committee? That's an example of sponsorship. So it might be you sponsor someone just once in a really specific way. Sponsors can also speak up in the interest of somebody. So as well as sponsoring someone into a role or opportunity, you can also advocate for them if they're in a difficult situation. So for example, if someone has raised a grievance, but you actually, rate them or feel, you understand their perspective and you think that they have a credible position, you might speak up on their behalf as well. Also, you might speak up for them in a promotions panel. So we do have some middle and senior managers on this call, and you will probably be involved in promotions decisions. And they're often by committee, and you're considering all the people going up to a certain level. So that's the opportunity for you to sponsor and advocate for somebody who you feel might otherwise be overlooked. So that's also a key role of a sponsor, is to speak up. Now, these relationships can be very short term. As I said, I've been sponsored by people where they just sponsored me on one specific promotion and they never sponsored me again. So, and they might even be secret. So you might even not be aware of who your sponsors are right now. But you might just think about who would probably advocate for me if I asked them. And it's okay that they're short-term relationships. Sponsoring is very different to mentorship, so it doesn't need to be ongoing. Mentors and sponsors aren't mutually exclusive either. So your mentor may sponsor you at some point. So they may mentor you and then they may at some point sponsor you into a role. And equally, someone might sponsor you and then become a mentor. So you can do both for somebody. That's absolutely fine. So we've gone through what it means to be a mentor, what it means to be a sponsor. So let's move on to the benefits. The benefits of both are absolutely huge. In mentoring, you have a huge opportunity to help the career progression and development of an individual. So the person being mentored, as we sometimes call them, the mentee, they have a huge benefit in terms of their own development and their own career progression because of the advice and guidance you give them. And if you're doing a good job as a mentor, then they will develop and progress quicker than they might have done without your help. However, the relationship also really benefits the mentor. You're developing your own skills, and we'll talk about those skills later, and huge benefits in terms of skill development, but also the concept of reverse mentorship. And in fact, there are a lot of organizations that deliberately create reverse mentorship programs where senior leaders are assigned a junior mentor, someone within the organization who's much younger, who can actually mentor them by bringing them a fresh perspective on their organization. But even without that structure, I have never mentored somebody and not benefited myself from the interaction from learning from their own experience, and also developing my own skills as a mentor. So it's hugely beneficial. And at the end of this, you might think you need to look for some mentors, but also if you're not mentoring somebody, I'd like you to look for someone to mentor as well. Finally, the organization. The benefits for an organization of having mentors and a mentorship culture are absolutely huge. They, in fact, just, financial benefits would be huge in terms of productivity and retention of talent. By having mentoring within the organization, you are developing your talent to a whole other level, and that will help retain people. If you've ever been in a difficult situation at work, and I have been in several, you may sometimes feel like leaving that organization, something I've also felt like in the past. But if you have a really good mentor and guide that you can go to, and they can give you some sage advice on how to navigate that difficult situation, then you're more likely to stay and actually have a positive outcome. So it's incredibly important for retention and also attracting talent. Word gets around, people talk about where they work. And if someone says, oh, I work at this fantastic place where the senior people help develop us, and I've got this fantastic mentor and they've given me so much advice, people will hear that and think, I'd love to work somewhere that really develops their talent in that way. So huge benefits for an organization. In addition, it encourages internal networking. By building relationships between mentors and mentees, you improve the connection between the people in your organization. And organizations work better when people are better connected with each other. So it's got huge benefits in terms of people working across teams and divisions and networking internally. And finally, it promotes diversity. So how does it do that? Well, mentoring can be used on a specific challenge, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So you might focus it on a group that you feel is underserved or underdeveloped. But also mentors can, really impart useful advice. And for people who don't naturally self-promote, so for example, if you think about women who may not put themselves forward for a big stretch promotion, having a mentor who encourages them to do that actually promotes diversity by encouraging the retention and development of your female talent. It can work for any group in diversity, but mentoring can be a really key way of developing people who might otherwise be overlooked. Now let's come on to the benefits of sponsorship, because sponsorship also has a huge role to play in diversity. Because sponsorship often encourages the promotion of people who aren't natural self-promoters. Now, as I said at the beginning of this, there are some people who just naturally are good at advocating for themselves, speaking up, volunteering for projects, and putting themselves forward for new roles. But people who aren't naturally comfortable doing that can often be overlooked for promotion, for reward, for opportunities. Having a sponsor, someone who actually says, no, that person's really good, I've noticed their work, we should put them on this committee, is a great way of helping people who aren't natural self-promoters. So sponsorship has a really important role there in keeping people visible who might struggle with visibility. It also massively encourages internal mobility. I've been sponsored sideways into roles. I've moved between departments because I was sponsored. And so it's a great way of moving your talent within your organization. And often you might have some people who are brilliant, but they're just in the wrong role. And if they get moved into the right role, they can thrive. So again, it's really valuable for an organization that you can increase internal mobility, and it's really valuable for the people because they end up in a role that's really suitable for them. So it develops talent, it improves retention because people are less likely to be overlooked. And if it's a really nice experience to be sponsored into a role, you feel really valued. And finally, as I said, it can really help improve diversity. Again, because some groups may be overlooked because there may be a bias in your organization to promote a particular group. And if you have sponsors who are very aware and mindful of their role as a sponsor, they can look out for talent who might get overlooked and they can put those names forward. So for example, when I became head of fixed income research at RBS, I was sponsored into that role. I was not the obvious candidate at that point, and many people would have said that I was maybe didn't have enough experience because I took that role on when I was 30, and it's normal to have that role when you're 40 plus. But someone sponsored me into the role. And so I took on a role that was traditionally male, had always been male in that particular organisation, and I was sponsored into it, whereas I would definitely not have put my name forward, and I wasn't an obvious choice. So this is how it can really help encourage the promotion of candidates who might otherwise be overlooked into senior levels. So sponsorship is hugely important. And if you activate the sponsors in your organisation, if you make senior leaders and even middle management leaders responsible for looking for talent and sponsoring it, you will find that improves diversity in the organisation. So let's move on to how we build the culture that supports mentoring and sponsorship. And particularly, I want to talk about mentoring. So first of all, build on what you have. So go back to your organisation and see, do you already have a mentoring scheme? And if so, can you get involved as a mentor? Can you get involved as a mentee? Can you get involved in organising it? It is so much easier to build on an existing programme than to set one up from scratch. Now, I have set 2 up from scratch, but I would say if there's already something in place, it will be much easier for you to get buy-in and to get it off the ground if you're building instead of starting fresh. So actually go and do the research, ask around, find out what's available in your organisation. If you are then setting up a new mentoring or sponsorship initiative, it's really important you start with a specific focus. If you just say, we just want to have mentoring across our organisation, we want everyone to have it, here's a portal, everybody use it, it's not specific enough. And the people being involved, they won't have a purpose to latch onto. So when I set up my talent development programme at RBS, I did that for the RBS Women's Network. And we identified that there was a group of women who had just finished their graduate training, their graduate rotations, and that they seemed to need a bit of help, that they could be a bit lost or they wouldn't know how to get to the next level. And they would have all this great development when they were on the grad scheme, and then they'd drop off and they would be unsupported. So we had a specific focus for women from a particular group. They'd had to be within 2 years of their graduate scheme ending, and we gave them a specific focus, a specific project, and mentoring was part of that. And that made that really effective. And everybody involved knew what they were doing, and the mentees knew to put themselves forward for the program. The next step is empower your people. So for the senior leaders on this call, don't just come in and say, oh, I want a mentoring program or a sponsorship program. Find the people in your organization who want to set this up or want to do this, and empower them to do it. Find the natural champions for mentoring, for diversity, and empower them. So for example, in my role that I was just talking about, I was head of development for the Women's Network. And so I went to our CEO, Chris Marks at the time, and said, we'd like to set up this program. And he didn't tell me how to do it. He empowered me to do it. And he said, great, yes, please go and do it. So find people who want to do this and empower them to set it up and self-organize. And yes, you need to give them some guidelines as to how they do this, but at the same time, you want to empower them to set up a program that they think will really work. Now, next up, we must make it accessible. So you must make whatever you set up accessible for mentors and mentees. And again, this is where actually being at home and being on Zoom and being remote makes things more accessible in some ways, because you don't have to be in the office. If you had a senior mentor, it used to be quite normal that you'd have to meet them in person very early in the day or at the end of their day because they had back-to-back meetings. Well, that's not very accessible for somebody who has children, for example. It's not very accessible for someone who has a very long commute or has other responsibilities. Maybe they're a carer. So you need to make sure that the timing and the access works for both the mentor and the mentee. So actually setting up a program that could be done fully virtually over Zoom actually is in a way more accessible. But just make sure, just check yourself and check you haven't set something up with a big launch event, and the launch event is at 5 p.m. when people might be doing the school run. So just think about accessibility. And finally, create choice within structure. So you do want some structure to a mentoring program. You want some parameters. You want to say to people how many meetings they might have or what level of engagement. Definitely they need to have some objectives. The mentors and the mentees need to be clear on the objective for the program. But at the same time, they need to have some choice. I have never heard of a mentoring program succeed where people were told, this person will mentor you. You don't have a choice and you must meet every other Monday. And this is what must happen. Because you've got no agency in that. You have no choice yourself as the mentor or the mentee about who you're paired up with or about how you structure that relationship. So you want to give people some structure and some guidance. And we'll talk about resources at the end. But for example, giving the mentors and mentees some training on how this will work and some guidance and, talking about best practice. But at the same time, create a structure where people can select each other and where they can maybe set appointment times or frequencies that work for both of them. Finally, make sure that if you're running a program, whether it's focused on sponsorship or mentoring, that you have at least one senior sponsor. Anything to do with culture, tone from the top is absolutely essential. So you need a senior leader who's going to speak up for this. So you need a senior leader who's going to be a sponsor for the program and going to say this is important. And ideally, the senior leader themselves will be involved as a mentor, and they will also share their own experience. So recently, I was interviewing Paul Pomeroy, who's the CEO of McDonald's UK, and he was sharing with me what had helped him become a leader and develop as a leader. And he was very open and public about his mentor and the value of that relationship. So if you have senior people saying, I benefit hugely from being mentored and being a mentor, then it encourages other people to see the benefits. So do go out and recruit a senior sponsor. And I was very fortunate to have a very supportive CEO at RBS when I did this. So let's move on to the key skills that you need to be a good mentor or be a good sponsor. The first thing is just a willingness and an ability to make time for the relationship. It's very easy to sign up and say you're going to do something, but you actually have to follow through. And mentoring does take some time for the relationship. So you need to make sure you are genuinely available. Don't offer your support and then not be available for the mentee, because that's incredibly demoralizing for them. As a mentor, you also need to be able to ask open questions. So don't go in with closed questions about was something a success or not, and someone could just answer yes or no. You want to ask open questions. How's everything going? What are you enjoying? What are you finding challenging? So this is where actually coaching skills can really work well for developing your mentoring skills. Listening is absolutely key. And it's so easy as a mentor with lots of experience and advice to just want to share all that advice and have a big download on your mentee. But actually, a lot of the conversation should be you listening to them talking about their experience and challenges. At the same time, you do want to impart some sound advice, but you must realize your limits. So sometimes you might not be the best person to give advice on a topic. And if you don't actually have the knowledge to back yourself up, just admit it. Just say, I don't have the answer, I'm going to find out. Or maybe you can talk to this person. So don't think you need the answers to everything. You do need to help your mentee navigate difficult situations. So if something challenging comes up and they come and confide in you, do make the time and take the effort to help them manage that in a considered way. And you may want to arrange a follow-up quite soon afterwards to check in how they're doing. Empathy and encouragement are also incredibly important. So empathizing with their challenges, but at the same time, don't let this turn into a meeting where they can just complain about everything. You need to encourage them to be self-responsible and take responsibility and come to you also with solutions for their issues. Don't assume you know how to mentor. Just because you have lots of experience doesn't mean you're going to be a good mentor. So do get training and research the topic. And we will share some resources with you later that will help you develop your mentoring skills. And finally, always have your own mentor. However senior you get, you need a mentor. But also, however junior you are, you can still mentor somebody. So I'm also involved with the Women's Societies Alliance, which was set up by some students at the LSE. And they set up this organisation to help support women at university level who wanted to enter finance. So they started this when they were senior students for the junior students. So you can help anybody. There's always someone a couple of years behind you that you can help. And now they're moving into their own roles and they've set up this amazing organisation to support students. So those are the key skills for mentoring. What about sponsorship? Sponsorship is a very different kettle of fish. You're not having regular meetings with people. You might, in fact, sponsor someone who you've never really had a one-to-one with. Your key skill is your ability to spot talent. So think about yourself as a talent scout for a sports team. Start getting good at just observing people and seeing who you think might be talent within your organization. Who seems to have the skills you need? Who seems to have the right attitude? And particularly start getting good at spotting people who might be overlooked. So they might not be the natural self-promoters. You need to have a strong network to sponsor, because you're probably going to sponsor people from one area into another. So you need to have a strong network so that you can create opportunities for the people you sponsor. You also absolutely need influencing skills, because if you're going to advocate for somebody, don't assume everyone will agree with what you're saying. For example, if you're at a promotions board and you need to advocate for a candidate who other people are saying shouldn't be promoted, but you really think they should, then you really need to be able to influence the rest of that panel as a sponsor. So you can work on your influencing skills, and certainly most organizations offer some training in it, and you can just see how you can make a case and really influence the rest of the group to see things from your perspective. Finally, you need the confidence to speak up when it's difficult. So sponsorship isn't just advocating for people to get promoted or go on projects. It can be speaking up for somebody who's being discriminated against or something challenging is happening for them. So you may find yourself as a sponsor saying something that other people don't agree with. And certainly when I was sponsored into my role as head of fixed income research, the person who sponsored me, other people didn't necessarily agree with him. They didn't necessarily think I should be the candidate. So he had to speak up and give an opinion that wasn't everybody else's. So a sponsor does need a backbone, and it is really important in an organization in general that we do speak up for our fellow colleagues and for talent within the organization. So those are the key skills. And now before we move on to Q&A, so I'm sure you will have questions, and please share them in the comments box. We look forward to getting them. But I want you to think about your next steps. You know, this isn't just an interesting webinar on sponsorship and mentorship. This is meant to encourage you to go away and make a difference within your own organization. So I'd encourage you all, first of all, to go back to your organization and find out what's available. And if there's a mentoring program, sign up as a mentor. And if you don't have a mentor, also sign up as a mentee. You can do both within one program, but make sure you just get involved with what is already available in your organization. Now, what if you find that there's nothing? There's really no program, there's no structure to this. Well, it is beneficial to have a structured mentoring program within an organization. So setting one up is actually a really great way that you can contribute to your organization. So you might talk to a senior leader and say, I'm thinking about setting up a mentoring scheme. What do you think? As I said, go back to the tips we shared on building the culture, and we're going to share this deck afterwards, but make it specific. Don't just say mentoring in general. Have a specific focus and say, I want to set up a scheme. Not only is this a really great thing to do, but it's a fantastic way to raise your profile. I gained huge profile from the work that I did developing junior talent at RBS. I was able to have conversations with the CEOs of each part of the bank, corporate, retail, and investment banking, because I was speaking about an important topic and I wanted their involvement. So it is also terrific from a career progression perspective to be involved in this way and to show an organization that you're not just there for your own benefit, but you want to develop the talent within the organization. Beyond a specific program, I want you to start looking at those around you and start thinking about who might need some mentoring or who might need sponsorship, and start to become that kind of talent scout. You know, it can be difficult for a junior person to ask a senior person for support. So you might just take someone for a coffee spontaneously and say, oh, let's go for a coffee. How are you finding everything? And a relationship might develop organically. But do start looking out for talent that you can develop. And it doesn't matter how junior you are, there's always someone who's more junior in some way that you can help. But finally, you need to take care of yourself as well. So map out your own sponsors and mentors. It looked like almost half of you have a mentor already, which is fantastic, but maybe you need another one. What specific areas do you need help in? What do you find it difficult to navigate? And also, where do you need inspiration? Because mentors can be hugely inspiring figures. They might be people who are 5-10 years ahead of you, and you think, when I get to that level, I'd like to be like them. So build that wish list of your mentors. And a lot of you don't think you have a sponsor, but have a think, has anyone ever spoken up for me? Has anyone ever put me forward for promotion or advocated for me? Great, so put them on your sponsor list and you may need to call on them again. And think about other people who are senior. Who would I like to sponsor me? And how can I influence them? And this comes back to personal branding. How can you present yourself and put yourself forward and be visible to those people so that they can see your work and see your talent, which may mean that if they're ever involved in a decision that affects you, they're much more likely to sponsor you in that situation. So don't go around saying to people, oh, will you sponsor me? You know, this isn't charity fundraising for a fun run. Just start thinking about who you could influence, who you could create a positive impression with, who might sponsor you. Certainly with mentoring, you can approach people directly. But as I said, don't go straight away and say to someone, oh, will you mentor me? Go with a specific issue and ask them for their advice or guidance. It might even be that you're not sure where to go next and you say, you know, you're further along in your career. I'm really impressed by your journey. Could you spare me 15 minutes to just talk to me about how you got there? But go in with something specific to talk about. Don't ask for an hour straight away. Just ask for 15, 20, 30 minutes. And over time, that relationship will build organically. Don't force it. Don't try and get someone to mentor you just because they're senior. You do need a bit of a personality fit as well. Now, as I said at the beginning, the CMI have the most fantastic resources and training and webinars. I am a fan, and I highly recommend that if any of you aren't members, that you do join, because there is a lot of information that we've shared with you today that's backed up by resources on the CMI portal. So we have a mentoring guide all about mentoring, and we even have a mentoring platform and a matching service. So you can get a mentor outside of your own firm. And in fact, I encourage you to do that, because a mentor from outside your own company might bring a fresh perspective, and they'll certainly help you build your network beyond your organization, and that might help you move externally. We have a mentoring digital brochure, so there's just loads of resources. And there's also the Management Direct portal, which is just absolutely full of really useful information, whether you're at manager level or not. So we've equipped you with lots of resources. I hope you found this overview of sponsoring a mentorship helpful, and it's encouraged you to get involved. So what we'd like to do now is just go to your questions. And as I said before, please do connect with me on LinkedIn and follow up. If you want to follow up around coaching, just send me an email. I love to hear from everybody on this session. And Katie, thank you so much. Can we go to questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. That was really, really inspiring. And I'm sure what you've shared today has given everyone a lot of food for thought if they're looking to become a mentor or looking to have a mentee. It was really interesting angle to look at the impact of COVID as well. I think we underestimate kind of the increasing importance of having sponsorship and mentorship when you're working remotely, because it is a completely different landscape in terms of your working environment. And you, as you mentioned, don't have all the opportunities that you might do to create those relationships organically. And thank you to everyone that's obviously joined today and engaged in the conversation in the comments box, and those that have provided questions beforehand. So as Emily mentioned, we've got time now to cover off a few of them. So first of all, as a line manager, how would I enable mentoring and sponsorship fairly in my organisation?
Well, you do need to create a culture where it's available, but you do also sometimes need to challenge people in your culture. So if, for example, you find that mentors are picking people to mentor, picking mentees who are just like them, who look like them, have the same background, it's worth challenging them. And you might even set that out from the beginning and say, look, we'd like you to mentor someone from a different group to yourself. So I think we do need to be brave and open and have those conversations about diversity and make sure that everybody is getting mentoring. And that's why sometimes having a program around a specific group can work really well. It could also be a program around a specific department. Like just giving it a bit of structure means it's more likely that everyone will be matched up in the right way. So I think just encouraging that. And then also really encouraging the mentees to feel like they can sign up, because sometimes they're a bit afraid to have these relationships. So again, a senior role model may be doing a little, if he does a kind of panel discussion with someone he mentors about how that relationship began and the value of it, can be really beneficial as well.
Thank you. The next one I find particularly interesting because it isn't something we've covered today, and not necessarily maybe something that everyone would think would be a challenge when you think about mentoring. But how can we talk to our line managers about mentoring and sponsorship without it seeming like a slight on their existing skills?
That's a great question. Thank you to whoever gave that question to us. Yeah, because, line managers often think they are responsible for your development. And so if you say to them, oh, I want to have a mentor or a sponsor, I think most managers would understand that, but some managers, they can be a bit sensitive about it. It's always about what we call pre-positioning. It's always about entering that conversation by setting the scene, by saying, I want to develop in this specific area, or I feel like I need a bit of support in X, Y, Z. And I think I'd really benefit from having a mentor to do that. It's very different from just coming in and saying, I don't feel like I'm being developed, I want a mentor. I can totally see how that conversation might feel like an attack. I also do think mentoring is actually much more common than we realise. Your manager may have a mentor themselves, but they may keep them secret. So there's a lot of people out there who are being secretly mentored, and they're just not declaring it because that relationship is private to them. So it's just about framing it and making sure that they understand that it's part of their development. You can even be more tactical than that. If in your own performance review, they have set you a goal, you could even say, oh, for this specific goal, I think I'd like to speak to someone who's got more experience in that field and I'd like to get their advice. You don't even have to call it mentoring. Finally, or just on this point, I'd like to say you don't actually need to tell your managers about your sponsors or mentors. It's not necessary. They don't need to know. So you can go and get your own mentors, and you don't actually need to clear it with them if you think they won't be comfortable with it.
Thank you. We've had a question from Michael. How can you convince someone to become a mentee?
Well, Michael, that's a great question. I don't know if you're convincing them to become your mentee versus just become a mentee in general. Certainly, there has to be some chemistry. So if you think someone really needs mentoring, but they're resistant to you, you don't need to force that relationship. They might just need someone else to mentor them. If, however, you have people that you manage and you think they'd really benefit from mentorship, which everybody would, and they're resistant to the idea, that's where you do need to lay the groundwork. That's where it's worth sharing your own story or bringing someone else in who can talk about how they benefited from mentoring. If they hear from somebody else who's achieved their goals, who got promoted, for example, and they say how mentoring was really important in helping them do that, they're more likely to buy into it. But certainly, I don't think mentoring works when the mentor or the mentee feel that it's compulsory to be in that specific relationship. So it's less stick, more carrot. You have to really find something for them to get excited about and for them to see how this is going to help them achieve their goals.
Thank you. This is a personal one from me. You touched on reverse mentoring, whereby a more junior member of staff obviously departs their wisdom onto a more senior colleague. But how would you go about suggesting that kind of relationship, or would you always have to wait for someone to approach you as the more junior member of staff?
Well, this is where I think it's really beneficial to be part of what we call kind of an employee-led group. So certainly within larger organizations, you will have networks. You will have maybe an LGBTQ network. You might have a women's network. You can have networks for all different groups. And those networks, in a way, have a nice kind of independent role to advocate for their people. So I would find if I, as a person, just went and said to our CEO, we need some reverse mentoring here because I think our senior leaders are disconnected from the rest of the staff, I don't think I'd have gotten anywhere. However, if you go from within an employee-led network and say, we have a goal in our network to achieve X, or even a goal in your department, but we have an objective. And as part of that, we think it would be really fantastic to pair up some junior mentees with senior mentors, and for it to be a mutual relationship where you're going to learn from each other to achieve X goal, they're much more likely to go for it because it's goal specific. There's something specific about it. So I do think the employee networks have a huge role to play in encouraging senior leaders to be mentors. And they can often be quite powerful and have influence on the senior people to lobby them into action. So I certainly used that position to lobby senior people to get involved. And they were fantastic. They would get involved. They would judge our talent panels, all sorts of things that they wouldn't have done if I was just asking for myself.
Thank you. Angela has just asked a question, and this is something I've heard of as well. When is a more formal style of mentoring more appropriate, where you have a mentoring contract as such?
Often when you have a really specific need And also sometimes if the mentor is external. And I have seen someone's also ask another question about external mentoring, because you can pay for a mentor. And certainly there are some very senior mentors out there and senior leaders who pay to be mentored by someone extremely senior. So certainly if money's changing hand, you're going to want a contract. There is definitely a place for a contract and a structure in terms of agreeing the objectives and goals. But I do get concerned that if we make it too formal, it takes away the fact that this is really the relationship between someone who has wisdom and experience and someone junior. So what we've always done when I've worked in organizations on this is, rather than having a contract and people signing a contract with each other, other than if you wanted people, for example, to sign a confidentiality contract to make them feel secure, is more that we would give guidelines and recommendations. And we would say, this is the structure we recommend. These are the things you shouldn't do as a mentor and a mentee. And these are things you should do. So I prefer the slightly less formal relationship, but certainly if it's external, you might need some confidentiality agreements in there. And certainly if it's paid, you want to have a formal agreement around that.
Thank you. This kind of links into that. How do you make sure that you keep a mentoring relationship as professional, as appropriate? Well, it's easy to do that. How would you make sure that those boundaries remain?
I mean, you can become friends with your mentors, and there's no rule that says you can't be friends with people you work with. I think it would be a really sad world if that was the case, because certainly the thing I loved most about my career in banking is the relationships I formed, and a lot of those were friendships as well. But at the same time, you're not their buddy. When you're there to mentor someone junior, you're there to give advice, and sometimes that advice won't even be what they want to hear. And so it is good to just have a sense of structure to the relationship. You're meeting maybe within working hours or within the office or over Zoom, but it's not straying into something like texting on the weekend. And you might think about what you ask them. Certainly you'll ask them how well they are, but don't pry into people's personal lives. They may want to share. I've had people I was mentoring who've come to me with difficult personal situations, and I've been very happy to be a sounding board for them. But I wouldn't do the same thing. As a mentor, I wouldn't bring and offload my own personal situation to them. I think in a way, a good way of thinking about it is the way you think about being a manager and the people you manage. You'll have good rapport with them. You might share what's happened on the weekend. You certainly would buy them coffee, but you probably aren't going to share a lot of your personal information, and you're not going to pry into their personal life.
Yeah, I think it's important to highlight that. As we're working remotely, I find in my working life, kind of personal and professional lives and conversations you're having, because of everything everyone's experiencing, often do cross over. So I think they're good kind of boundaries to point out. We've had one final question from Jane. What's the best way to start a conversation with a potential mentor? Are there any hints and tips or particular conversation starters that you would suggest?
Yeah, definitely not, will you be my mentor, as I've said. That's not the way to approach it. It really is, have a reason that you want to talk to that person. And it can't be because they're senior, just that. It should be genuine. You should genuinely be interested in how did they achieve what they achieved. When I think about the people who mentored me, sometimes it was just that we came across each other on a few projects. And then I remember one person in particular where I then had a specific issue, and I actually just emailed him and said, I know you're super busy. He's very senior. I know you're super busy, but there's something that I would love to get your advice on. Can you spare me 15 minutes? And he was great and said, absolutely, come up, let's have a meeting. And we did, and it was incredibly helpful. But I had something specific to go and talk to him about. And from there, he said, oh, well, if you ever need help in the future, come back. And so this person also was naturally someone who would like to mentor. And so he naturally created that relationship. So go with something specific. It can just be an email. If it's someone outside of your network, your industry, your company, it can be a LinkedIn. That you might have heard a fantastic speaker speak at an event. And again, you're not messaging them on LinkedIn saying, will you be my mentor? You might say, I heard you speaking at X. I found it really inspiring. I have a specific question about, that I'm dealing with. Do you mind if I message you to ask you for advice? You're not even asking that person necessarily for a phone call. And then let it evolve naturally. And you might find that this person isn't someone who's a natural mentor. They might not be super helpful. They might not be generous with their advice. And then that's okay. Just move on and ask somebody else. And you will by approaching people that way, you will find the people who naturally want to give back. And I think more and more senior people understand that it is a responsibility of being senior, that you also must make time to mentor people.
Thank you. And we've got time for one last question. We've had a few questions around cultivating a sponsorship relationship. So would you mind just elaborating on what you've already started and talking about during the webinar on sponsorship?
Yeah, because again, it's a weird one because it's a really important relationship, but it sounds very odd if you ask someone to sponsor you unless there's a specific reason that allows that. So for example, when I was being put forward for my director promotion, you did actually need a certain number of sponsors, and I did actually go around and have conversations with people who I already considered my sponsors. And I've actually I put out on last week on LinkedIn, I put out a shout out to my mentors and sponsors ahead of this, the people who had helped me in my career. And I did go to some people and say, I want to get this promotion, would you be willing to sponsor me? That's appropriate. Otherwise, remember, a sponsor is an advocate for you because they think you have value in terms of talent, attitude, whatever it is you bring to the party. So the way to cultivate that relationship is to help people more senior than you see your talent so that they will naturally advocate for you. So it's less about developing a specific relationship and more about making sure that key people can see what you're good at and see what your skills are. And this is where visibility and personal brand is so important. You know, I've worked with a lot of, I've male and female clients. I've had to work more with my female clients on making themselves more visible. There's no point being great at your job if nobody knows that you're great at your job. So really making yourself visible means that you start to get sponsors. And all my sponsors came about because I spoke up in meetings, because they could see how I worked and they liked my attitude. And I didn't actually ask, apart from for that one promotion, I didn't ask any of them to be sponsors. I was very happy that they just decided to sponsor me on what they'd seen.
Thank you so much. I think that's kind of all the time we've got for questions. Have you got any final words, Emily, before I just do a couple of call to actions?
Just that it's so worthwhile both to be the recipient of this and to do it for others. So if you're not sponsoring or mentoring somebody, start doing it now. And as you know, my door is open. So do message me on LinkedIn. I might not always respond straight away, but if you have a follow-up question about this and you want some advice, do reach out to me. I'd be happy to help.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone that's attended today as well. If you are a member of the CMI, you can access the CMI Women's Blueprint for Balance open source tool, which there was a link to in the comments section, but it will be shared afterwards too, which has got a whole range of resources to help promote diversity in the workplace. If you'd like to upload any resources, please do so by clicking the link in the chat comments as well. And for anyone that's new to the CMI, there's also a link in the chat's comments around how you gain access to the thousands of practical development resources we have through our Management Direct. So our next CMI Women Digital event is on the 26th of November, which is CMI Women Blueprint for Balance, Creating an Ambitious Personal Development Plan. That's with Marie-Hannah Meads, Professional Development Training. And we also have a Maximising Customer Engagement event on the 16th of November, which I will be leading on along with two of my colleagues, Dominic Herndl and Yeri Henry. So please sign up for that one as well. And you can also sign up to the free CMI newsletter. So thank you everyone very, very much and enjoy the rest of your day.